Today's guest is Louie Larimer, an author, attorney, mediator, and strategic advisor. He also hosts the YouTube channel Searching for Wisdom. Louie, welcome to Conversations with Sekani. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, thank you very much. It's an honor for me to join you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. And wherever you'd like to go, I will follow.
All right. Okay. So yes, it's a pleasure to also have you here. And Louis, I want us to dive into your early years, right? When you look back at your younger self, what first, sparked your interest in psychology, leadership, and understanding human behavior?
Well, when you say my early years, I can say that my first real yearnings for, psychology and philosophy and law, I think it really occurred when I was studying my undergraduate degree, and I was going to a liberal arts college, and I had to declare a major. And I looked around and I said, well, I like studying everything. And the course that had the least number of requirements was psychology. So I said,
Hmm.
I'm going to give that a try. And as a result of that, I was able to take a lot of other courses in philosophy and economics and history and still get my degree. And it was at that point that I began learning about my inner self, my inner voice, and I just started gaining knowledge about, oh, there's something about understanding who I am and understanding other people. And so I just continued my journeys. And then, of course, I was able to go to graduate school in business administration, which I went in the exact opposite direction because those traditional MBA programs, are about finance and production control. But I got through that, and then I went to law school and I got back into, the notions of what is the right thing and what are the laws. And then ever since that time, I've just had the opportunity to teach and to, study and write and explore things about psychology. I am fascinated with um, the mind and what goes on inside, our thinking, our feelings, how we balance that. And I'm just sort of a lifelong learner of philosophy and spirituality. So I think it's just sort of the seed that I came into, the world, and it was cultivated, and here I am, 45 years later.
Wow. I mean, what a journey, I would say, because wow, your life story is one of our achievements, right? You've achieved a lot, I would say. You've spent decades advising leaders across businesses and government, right? So what pattern do you consistently see in effective leadership?
Well, um, you know, the notion of leadership means so many different things to a whole host of people who studied this field. There was a time when I did a research of how do people think about leadership, and how do they define it, and what are the models of leadership. And I identified at one point over 75, I would call them legitimate writers who had their views of leadership. But as I studied all of those theories and looked at those different models of what makes someone different and successful as a leader, it boiled down to a few things from my unique perspective as I looked at all of those things. And just one of my observations is that it is the leader's ability to produce results and outcomes and to
Mm,
create a future, because that's what leaders have to do. Because if they don't create a result, bring about a desired outcome, or create a vision, no one will follow them. More importantly, no one will hire them to lead a corporate enterprise or to run a not-for-profit or to be a government leader.
mm,
And I discovered that, some people, do rise into positions of authority, but people don't want to follow them. And
mm,
I've always been intrigued by that. What is the thing that makes it different? When I used to teach other graduate school students this concept of leadership, one of the things I would do, because I got to teach adults, by the way, I would ask them um, in my classes, I would say, tell me in your mind, who is the best leader or boss you ever worked for? And I said, do you have somebody? And they would think about it and they would say, yes, I do. I've got somebody. And I says, okay, get that person in your mind, bring them into the classroom today, think about them. And then I want you to look at that person, the imaginary person you brought into the room, and tell me, what was it that they did? What was it that they knew? Or what were they like on the inside that made them, in your mind, the best leader you ever worked for? And then I said, write that down on a piece of paper. And they sat there, then they did it. And then I said, okay, before we go further, I want you to turn that paper upside down. And now I want you to think of the worst person you ever worked for. Who was the worst
mm,
boss that you just couldn't do anything? You didn't want to follow them, would never choose them. And write down why that was the case. And then we had this most delightful, wonderful conversation where they told me their stories about their best and their worst bosses. And I listened to them. And what I learned as a result of that experience was so many of them said, this person was a great leader among all the other persons because they, more than anyone else, took an interest in me. They
mm, mm,
placed my interests into their world. They cared and they worked with me. They brought out the best in me. They used the voice of praise with me. They were gentle when I needed correction. They were kind. And at the same time, they inspired me. They touched my heart. And there was clarity. We knew where we were going and we knew why we were here. And then oddly, what they told me about their worst boss was this. They said, oh gosh, the worst boss I ever worked for, they were control freaks. They were micromanagers. They were watching me the whole time. It was just about authority. It was about their way or the highway. They made me feel shame. They um, placed themselves above me. They never shared credit. And so, from those lessons, and then having been a CEO of several companies and, experimenting with leadership, I've really discovered that the power of people is profound if the leader shows interest in the employee or the worker and can provide all those things I've just said. So I'm sorry to
mm,
talk so much, but those were many of my insights in response to what makes a leader stand out. It's touching their hearts and their souls in such a way that those people would choose them to be their leader. And so I've always taught
mm.
folks, if you're a leader, you might want to ask yourself and your people, would they choose you if you were, they had a choice? If they were volunteers, would they choose you? That seems to make a difference with respect to, leader behavior. I hope that makes some sense to you.
Yes, it does, definitely. Right? It has me doing some, self-reflection, right? I was like when you were saying, think about the best leader you've had and the worst leaders. I actually thought about it. And like you said, in order to be the best leader, right, or a good leader, rather, you need to, be more caring, right? Think of that person that was a good leader to you. And if you could try emulating some of those characteristics and genuinely caring for people, right, that's one of the things that, makes you a good leader, right?
Absolutely. I have had the opportunity, to work with many professional some partners in joint
Mm,
ventures and things. And I have one or two that
Mm,
although they were partners of mine, they weren't necessarily my boss. I have these images of them, and I always tell myself, "Oh, be like Sharon." And the
mm,
reason I say Sharon is because she's a very accomplished government leader, and we were partners on a program, and we were equals. But she used what I call the voice of praise. She
mm,
said, "Louie, you did this so well, and Louie, I was proud of you for this." And she's, stuck in my mind, and I kept saying, I need to be more like Sharon.
mm.
So, you're getting that same experience, when you are able to relate to my comments about who is that best boss, and hope our listeners will do the same and they can identify it for themselves. But those were my insights on that effective leadership.
Right. Wow. Okay. So yes, I want us to, I would say thank you for sharing your insights with us. I think these are really powerful and very important, especially for young adults who are trying to, become better versions of themselves. Right. So I want us to touch on, conflict negotiation and relationship. So you've worked extensively in mediation and conflict resolution. What do most people fundamentally misunderstand about conflict?
Well, I have a unique perspective, I believe, on conflict because, 17 years of my life, while I was also teaching, I was a trial lawyer. And so I was in what I call the arena, doing battle, advancing best interests, trying to get an edge, trying to resolve conflict. But the adversarial system in the United States, of course, is based on cross-examination and, the traditional compete in battle. And I found myself getting weary of that. And although, it was a win-lose proposition during conflict in that arena. And one day I had an emotional shift where I said, I think my inner way of being, who I am at my core, is more of a peacemaker. And so I started moving away from trying to win to looking for creative solutions and then looking for ways to collaborate and help people avoid litigation and conflict. Some of my observations about conflict from a leadership perspective is leaders embrace oftentimes a diverse group of people and bring them together.
Mm,
But as you bring diverse people together and they're highly talented, they have ideas. And I call it the collision of different ideas. When you're leading a team, you've got 7 or 8 teammates, you got different vice presidents working for you. They all have their own unique ideas and ways of what they think the business should do. And the role of the leader in that is not to decide who's right and who's decide what's wrong, but to manage the collision of those differences to allow for the expression of those differences in ways that doesn't become nasty, bitter, and harsh. And I think great leaders have that capacity to do it. I have found as a mediator a wonderful forum, which is people will, come and ask me to sit with them and to help resolve conflicts. And I'll even do it with their lawyers. This Friday afternoon, I'm mediating a commercial litigation case that's
wow.
got some huge issues between it, and the lawyers are going to come and with their clients. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sit and listen to both sides, and I'm going to
Mm,
have them tell me their story, and then I'm just going to be calm. And I find that it is a very effective way for me to be in the world to help people like that. But I also find I have a fairly high success rate because people, I think deep down in their soul, if they have a calming presence, if they have someone who listens to them and can help guide them, and who genuinely cares about both sides and has trust in terms of what we say, people will emerge as their best selves and they'll resolve their conflicts. So I always have hope, when I work with folks who have conflict, that they are responding to the good seed that's within them, as opposed to the other seed of, self-interest and greed. But it's a human dynamic. And of course, people respond differently to conflict. Some people, when they get into a conflict, they push back. They put their fists up and they're
Right.
ready to stand firm and push and fight. And of course, those are what we call the competitors. They want to win, win. And
Right.
then, interestingly enough, the opposite end of that spectrum is there's some people that want to avoid it. They don't even want to deal with it. They just run away and they abdicate and, they won't deal with the conflict. And then there's some that just bargain. And when I say bargain, they say, if you give me this, I'll give you that. And then there are others that will give in and compromise pretty readily because they value the relationship that they have with the other party. And what I've discovered is those people that they are so delightful to work with because
Mm.
they care about the nature of their relationship, but they have a conflict and they don't want to jeopardize it. And so they're willing to make compromises.
Okay.
And so to give you I know it's a long answer, but there are a variety of perspectives of people. But the
Mm.
key to resolving conflict is to listen, to allow someone to be heard, to value what they are as a person. That doesn't mean you necessarily have to agree with them, but
Mm.
to hear them, value them, and then let them feel appreciated that they've had the opportunity. And then to come forward, um, when I say express proposals in a clean, efficient manner, free of bitterness, free of snide comments, and avoiding shame. And the good news in my world is I just love finding those golden nuggets in the world and that they come to me for help. And then it's good to see people do that. And then it's even greater to see someone who comes in with a real hard position and they're angry and they're upset. But after they can be with a group of calming people, their internal state changes. And you can see that happen if you're patient with them. So those are some of my insights on conflict. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but love to hear your comments back too.
Right. I think it makes absolute sense, honestly. Right. Conflict, like you said, right? There are people who, because of their ego, right, they cannot make resolutions between themselves and someone else, right? Because of their ego. While there are some who cannot even stand conflict, right? They cannot stand uh having difficult conversations. I don't know if it's a result of fear, but they avoid difficult conversations. And then, like you said, there are those ones who actually respect the relationship they have with the other person, right? So because you respect the relationship you have with someone else, you tend to actually listen to them. You actually hear them, not listening so you can give a response, but you listen to actually understand their point of view. Then you make them, feel heard, right? You value them. And then also, you don't, like you said, you don't necessarily have to agree with what they said, but at least you gave a listening ear and you can as well just pitch your own point of view to them too. That's the best way to actually, um, is the best way to communicate with someone when it comes to conflict, right? So now that I
Well,
mentioned, right, okay,
yeah, I was going to reinforce and build on that comment because you
right,
said some things that are favorite topics of mine. And
mm,
one of which is that difficult conversation.
Right.
And you said that so well because there are people, particularly in personal relationships, that we know we've got a conflict, but for
Mm,
some reason we are so fearful of having this conversation, and we fear it because we can't control the other person's reaction and we don't know what'll happen. Sometimes
mm,
we fear that they may retaliate. Sometimes we fear that it'll ruin the relationship. And then sometimes we fear that we might not be able to control ourselves when they respond. And
mm,
so if we don't clean those feelings, if we don't cleanly express our emotions and do it in a manner that doesn't shame the other party, we can hear beyond the words. And that's the other thing that I tell folks. As we are in conflict, it's important for us to hear not just the words, but what I call the emotional content behind the words, the
mm,
feelings behind it. And once you understand where a person is coming from emotionally, sometimes it's because they're feeling vulnerable to you, sometimes they're fearful. At that point, you can make some choices about how you want to respond, and which makes a big difference. Because if
mm,
you respond with a hostile view, they're going to push back. If you respond with a kind, gentle view, you can have those conversations in ways that can lead to betterment for both parties. One of the things that I've just been struck with, it's not an original idea by myself, but it was an idea that was given to me many, many years ago. I don't even know the source, but it was this notion that what are your intentions
mm,
when you speak? When you are talking to someone and you're having a conflict with them, or you have to do something, do you do you want to shame them? Do you want to show how smart you are? Do you want to educate them? Do you want to understand them? Or do you want to bully and just get what you want? And this person, this writer, I wish I could remember who it was, basically said, be mindful of your intentions.
mm.
But but I got that. You refreshed my memory about that as you were talking. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're welcome. Also, I would like to say I'm learning a whole lot actually from you. I'm actually taking notes, right? Because these are these are really important things that I think everyone has to know, especially those who stand for peace, right? Because I think the world should actually be a better place for, peace and, to just share love, right? Because we do not have to be mean or angry all the time. So that's just my stand on the word
Sure,
particularly.
sure.
Right. So I want us to touch on our transformation and personal growth before the end of our conversation. So you've written extensively about personal transformation and change. So why do you think people resist change even when they know they need it?
Well, I believe from my observations and I believe from my personal experience that what we call transformation, which is to alter oneself, to
Mm,
become something different, right? That's transformation. Um, is in the hearts of many people. Another word for it is transcendence.
mm,
And transcendence is going beyond what we are today, becoming something new. So the
mm,
words transcendence and transformation and change are all related concepts. And your question, about what keeps people from altering and changing.
mm,
And, I think there are two aspects of that. Number one, I've discovered that people will change as a result of a stimulating event or an occurrence. And generally, it relates to I'm ready to change because the pain is too great. The pain that I'm in, that I'm experiencing is so great. I want to alleviate that change. And I'm looking for different ways to make that happen. So we call it avoidance of pain. That's why people change. The other is pursuit of pleasure. They see that there is something different about other people and they want that pleasurable experience. And so the problem becomes you can't just think about changing, you just can't, because we have this other thing called um, the human will, right? Although human beings have a strong will, we're very determined, we have this spirit within us, that keeps us driving and persisting in things. But sometimes that human will operates against us because it's not strong. It's a weak will. And we hang on to comfort, even though it's painful. I know that sounds odd, but we are so unwilling to let go of what we know now because it frightens us. We don't know what happens if we let go of today, if what we hope for will come about. And so it is fear of a variety of things, of the unknown. And then it also relates to the inability to trust that there is a universal, a spiritual, a cosmic, a deity, or divine part of us, or something that will actually step in and help us in that transcendence. So part of that is unknowing. Part of it is we're not quite ready because we haven't had enough pain. And then sometimes we just don't know how to change. And therefore, you need a little bit of help. Um, and the essence of change is take small steps. Take those small steps and make sure you've got a good support group to help you do that. But that whole field of transformation and change to me is a fascinating thing because I went through a huge change in my life. And it was, I said I spent 17 years as a trial lawyer. And I knew I was not happy doing that from day one. I knew. I says, I don't like this. I don't like this warrior mentality. I don't like being on edge. It's unsettling to me. And I had this seed inside me that for some reason I thought that's what I needed to be. But I also knew that I wanted to be a peacemaker and a teacher. But here's the problem. We spend all our lives studying to do what we think we want to do, be a trial lawyer, spend all this money on education. I was successful, but I was not happy doing it. It wasn't joyful. The inherent nature of the work was not pleasing to me. And one day I just had had enough of it. I says, oh my gosh, I can't do this. I'm hurting too much on the inside. I'm doing things that I just don't enjoy. And I was afraid to let go. I was afraid to let go of the status of being a lawyer. I was afraid to let go of the steady income because we all have to have a livelihood to live, right? And I was uncertain that I would be successful. And that seed that was inside me kept telling me, you need to let go, you need to let go, and you need to trust. And finally, when the pain became so great, I finally said, that's it. I'm going to go do A, B, C, and D and see what happens. And that led me to my teaching and my consulting career and mediating and doing all the other things that I've been able to do as a result of that change. And the point of my story is that it was because of the pain I was feeling in my heart and in my soul that was not satisfying that allowed me to change. And
Mm,
oddly, some of my colleagues said, "Oh my gosh, Louis, that that's the most courageous thing we've ever seen a person do. And you walked away from this incredible career and you were prosperous and people knew you and you had a great reputation and you went out and you wrote a book and you just started teaching people. That's very courageous." And I smiled at him and I said, "Well, thank you. But it really wasn't because it was more a state of desperation. I was
mm,
fighting to reclaim my soul." So that's what I meant when I say pain or pleasure. But that's not everyone's experience, but that's my story of of
mm,
of change. And I tell people I haven't worked since 1997. And they go, "You got that much wealth?" And I go, "Well, I do later in my life, but and the reason I say that is since when I left doing the things that brought me no joy and no meaning, it became almost it was fun and
mm.
recreational. And I wish people could find that themselves. But that's my story of change. I didn't come out of a drug dependent problem or Great Depression. It's just I'm not happy in doing what I'm doing. But
Mm.
I'm sure you've got your stories and our listeners have their stories, and I'm
Right.
hoping our conversation helps them just a little bit.
Exactly. Wow. Okay. So yes, I would say thank you for sharing your, you know, beautiful story with us. I think it's one of resilience actually and strength because it takes someone who is, strong-willed to actually leave a career that they built, right? Just because, it doesn't make you feel happy. I mean, the world wouldn't understand it, but you, right? You're the only one who understands that, okay, this does not make me feel happy. I'm not happy within me. But, people would think, oh, you have the perfect life and everything. So it only takes strength for you to, be able to stop it and then do what you actually love. Right. So I'll say thanks for sharing that with us. And also, you highlighted reasons why most people feel it's difficult, right, for them to, embrace change. And you said, first of all, it's as a result of avoidance of pain. Then there's pursuit of pleasure, then fear of the unknown, and also the inability to trust in a higher authority or power, right? So, yes, and I think these are valid reasons why people would, not want to embrace change, even when they know they need it, right? So, yes, thank you for sharing that with us. And before we go, finally, I just want you to talk to someone out there because that is the sole purpose of my podcast to give advice to younger generations who are trying to seek better life and clarity, right? So for many people in their 20s, they feel overwhelmed trying to build a career while also figuring out who they are. So what advice would you give to them?
To the younger generations
Yes,
and
the
you know
younger
that
generation.
because I'm 73, and so of course the younger generation could span from the 20s to the 30s to the 40s, but I would tell all the same thing. I would urge them to be mindful, to discern, if they can, the movement of that which is within them. And what I
Mm,
mean by that is we have an inner voice, we have a spirit that is within us, and it moves us. But it's not a loud voice, it's a quiet one. And to take
mm,
the time in today's busy, busy, go, 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 rush, 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 world to sit and listen for the stirring of the Spirit.
mm,
And then, as part of that listening, to be humble. And humble and humility is to make room, to create space for the opinions of other people, to
mm,
allow them to express freely their opinions. And then for you, as you make space for those opinions, again, you don't have to agree, you just make space for it. But ask yourself, am I right? Is it
mm,
possible that my judgments, that I just might be wrong? And those are the things that, were passed along to me um, in my culture. Because I happen to be part Hawaiian, grew up in the Hawaiian Islands. My mother is Native Hawaiian. My father was, from the United States. And
mm.
those things I just shared with you came from my Hawaiian background. And I think that spans generations. But I just passed that along since you asked, and I appreciate the opportunity to share those thoughts.
Right. Wow. Okay, I'll say thank you so much, Louis. This was such an incredible, thoughtful conversation. Your perspective on leadership and human behavior. It just brings a level of depth that I think a lot of people truly need right now. So thank you, which brings me to the final segment of my podcast. I call it the rapid fire segment. And you could either answer with a word or a phrase starting now. What is one book that deeply influenced your life?
Oh, that one book I would say is The Runner's Bible, Runners Bible. And it was a book given to me by a friend of mine. He was a partner, and it had belonged to his daughter who he had lost. He'd given it to her. It was published back in 1929. And the preface to that book said, this is of some scripture, some holy writings for one who is constantly running, who runs. And it said in the beginning, it pays for us to take the time to sit and be quiet. But I have that book by my bedside, and it's a cherished book. But The Runner's Bible, that's one.
The Runner's Bible. Wow.
Yeah, the
Okay.
Runner's Bible. Yeah, you just Google that, but it's scripture, but the preface and
Mm,
the introduction of it just touched me so profoundly.
mm, wow. Okay. All right. So, what is a principle you try to live by every day?
Every day,
Mm,
I think it's we call it, I call it aho nui. Aho nui is Hawaiian for waiting
mm,
for the moment to come and to be patient. And I try
mm,
my best to be patient because
mm,
it's better. It's better if we
mm,
can wait for the moment to come, because it will. And while we're waiting for the universe to unfold, and while we are waiting for the moment, we have to do it without agitation
mm,
or frustration. And that is to be patient. And so
mm.
I try to remember that aho nui. I tell myself, Louis, just be aho nui. Just wait for the moment, let the
Mhm.
universe occur, and don't be agitated while you're waiting. I try,
Mm.
you know,
Right. Oh, Nui. Great.
aho nui. Yep.
Okay. All right. And finally, what does wisdom mean to you in one sentence?
wisdom is not knowledge. It is a combination of knowledge and information that you use with life experiences to make good judgments for the betterment of
Mhm.
yourself and for the betterment of those you love. That's my one sentence.
Okay, yes, Louis, I would say this has been such an amazing conversation. Personally, I learned a whole lot that I'm definitely going to apply to my daily life, and I hope my listeners do the same, right? And before you go, where can listeners, get to learn more about you and also connect with you?
Well, thank you for asking, of course. The first easy place for most people is just to visit the website, louielarimer.com, LOUIELARIMER.com. There I've got some books and I've written some articles that are just on the website that people might find interesting. And then, of course, if they are so inclined to just visit the channel, Louie Larimer, Searching for Wisdom, and that's how they can find me. But I appreciate you asking. You're very kind to invite me to have this conversation, and I also noted that you were a great listener because you were able to restate, my thoughts on conflict. You captured him, and I was throwing him at you pretty fast and furiously. So you did a great job on that as well. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Louis. Thank you for your kind words, actually. And yes, personally, like I said, I totally enjoyed our conversation, and I am glad I got to have this conversation with you. And yes, to my listeners, thanks for tuning in to Conversations with Sekani. If this episode sparked something in you, make sure to share to someone who you think might need this, and also subscribe so you don't miss out on new episodes. Once again, thank you, Louis, and do have a wonderful day ahead of you.
Well, likewise, I
All
appreciate
right,
you very
take care.
much. Yep.
You're welcome. Take care.
Okay.